All right.
Well, hey Tyler, good to catch up with you a little bit here for the last few minutes. And it's probably
Yeah.
great for you to be down at sea level at only 11,000 feet or whatever, right?
Oh, it's only like 9,300 feet here, so it's really not that bad.
Yeah,
It's pretty
right.
low by
Oh my,
comparison to where we spent the last like 3 months. Yeah.
yeah. Oh my God, the air pressure must be crushing you right now, kind of like you're 2 miles under the sea.
Seriously, yeah. No, it feels nice, like sleeping well. It's nice and warm. There's like plants and animals outside. It's amazing.
Right. I know. Yeah, I think that was the most striking thing to me in the Atacama was like, God damn, there's nothing alive up here, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, picture that and then add another like almost 2,000 vertical meters. And even Steve isn't up there. We have some bros and that's about it up at Everest Base Camp. And it's pretty inhospitable place. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there a Steve equivalent in the Himalayas? Like, what's the highest altitude bird there?
There like Steve has become kind of a like just funny name for like any bird. So like we do have like Himalayan Steve. I honestly don't know. I'm not a bird person, but there is like a big swoopy kind of hawk-like bird that goes quite high. But he doesn't, hang around and just like walk around on the ground like Steve of the Atacama does. So it's
Yeah.
not quite the same. Yeah.
Oh yeah. God, yeah, yeah. That's best entertainment going over there.
It's great. Yeah. I went up and saw Steve here in Quito this morning up on top of Route Pichincha. So he's alive and well up there.
Good, good. Always good to
Yeah.
hear. You had a picture of what you thought might be a baby Steve, huh?
Yeah, well, he's all brown. He doesn't have like this typical black and white. And for your audience, Steve is a bird. He started out as a bird in the Atacama Desert. It's a carannulated caracara. It's an Andean hawk, basically. And the reason it became a whole thing was because these birds would just like walk around the paths at the little cabins where we were staying out in the middle of the desert. And it was just funny because it like looks like a little person. And then anyways, it turns out it's the same bird that lives up here on top of the mountain in Quito that we see all the time. So it was, yeah, kind of a Steve connection there. And so Steve kind of encompasses all of these triangulated cars. And then also Steve became just a misnomer for like any bird anywhere.
Right. Nice. All right. I'll see if I got a Steve in my backyard. Who knows?
I'm sure you got some Colorado Steves. Yep.
Yeah, I think they're called magpies and they're really freaking evil, but
Yep.
but hey, well, welcome back to civilization, I guess.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it's good to be here.
Yeah, you had a great podcast series there, so I don't want to steal too much of the thunder from that. But I thought I'd throw out some questions that maybe the everyday man might want to hear about a little bit here. And
Sure.
you talk about civilization. I mean, I've always been amazed by Everest Base Camp, or EBC for short. How, I mean,
Yep.
all that crap gets up there. Obviously, there's no road that no trucks are driving that stuff up there. So
No.
it's either getting there by helicopter or on the back of Sherpas, which absolutely
Yep.
blows my
Or
mind.
yaks. Also
Or yaks.
yaks.
That's
Yaks
true.
carry some stuff too. Yep.
Yep, there's some yaks who probably are named, George or something. I don't know, but but
Yep.
I mean, you got this whole little tent sit. Well, not tent. It is pretty huge. I mean, because there are a lot
Yeah.
of expeditions up there,
Yep.
and I mean, there's a mess hall and there's cooking equipment. I mean, there's some serious stuff that gets up there.
For
Um,
sure.
yeah, and I mean, what is life like there? I mean, obviously, you got a lot of downtime.
Yeah, I mean, every space camp is, like you said, it's the analogy that I've heard is it's kind of like a music festival or like Burning Man or something, where it just, all this stuff gets put together and all these people come for this short amount of time and then it all gets stripped away and then they do it again the next year. That's the closest thing I can think of to kind of something analogous because there are, I guess it's nowhere near as big as a music festival, but there are, 1,000 people up in this really inhospitable place between the climbers, the Sherpa guides, the Sherpa who are working in base camp, like you said, as in the kitchen or things like that. So there's a lot of people there. For every one climber, there's probably another two or three people who are there basically to support that climber. When we're talking about the commercial expedition, so it is very much a small city. I mean, it's spread out kind of along this glacier in a line, and it's probably a mile from one end to the other. a base camp from kind of where you enter at the big famous rock where everyone, takes their Instagram photos, the trekkers, all the way
Right.
to the end, which is where really the true mountaineering route starts up the mountain. It's probably about a mile. And all along that route is just full of tents. And you have, it's getting even more and more ridiculous. I've worked with Asian trekking for all of my expeditions. They're an Apollo company, and I think they're a very good balance of kind of having all of the comforts that you might want at base camp without like going totally over the top. And then I've gone to other people's camps where they have like, these giant dome tents and there's like soft jazz playing and there's cappuccino machine and like all this stuff. And I'm like, this is a little bit excessive, man. Like, I don't know.
Right.
It really feels like being out in nature right now. Like they literally have like sofas and stuff in there. Like I have no idea how. I mean, that stuff must come on helicopter, but it's crazy. Like it is really really ridiculous how much opulence has come up there. I mean, you see some of these really high end companies that literally have like small dome tents with like a big raised bed and like a little porch almost area that's just for one person. That that's like as big as some people's entire like meal tents where you might have 20 people sitting or something. So it's
Wow.
yeah, it's a pretty wild place. It's honestly really inhospitable. Like my plan with this whole expedition was actually to not spend much time at base camp, and unfortunately, that kind of backfired when our very first attempt, which was super early in the season, didn't go so well, and we had to abandon that, and then we basically had to wait till the end of the season to go again
Yeah.
after all the crowds had gone. So we had these like 2 or 3 weeks at base camp that weren't really planned, and yeah, it's really rough. I mean, the temperature change is really ridiculous, like you experienced in the Atacama, Bill. That really cold nights and really hot during the day. It's like that times 10. It's even worse up there. And you don't really have any respite from it because, if you go in your tent during the day, it's like 90 degrees in the tent because it's like a little greenhouse. So it really is just a pretty inhospitable place. But it is getting, I would say, more modernized. Honestly, like I won't give the company credit, but a famous satellite internet provider has really changed the game in terms of connectivity at Basecamp. That like even like literally this year versus last year, 2025 versus 2024. I think last year I paid like $500 to get like 10 gigabytes of data at Basecamp. That was pretty slow, and this year it's amazing. I mean, it's fast. So that kind of technology, at the very least, for keeping in touch with your friends and family, is really nice. I do see a lot of people just sitting there scrolling Instagram or whatever at Basecamp, which I don't, think is
Right. That's
it's a
strange.
little ridiculous when you have like Mount Everest towering above you and it's like the most beautiful place on earth. But I get it. It's like you do have, like you said, you have a lot of downtime. And for me, as a pro athlete, I'm out training for a few hours every day. For most people, a lot of that time is literally just sitting around reading, scrolling, talking to your friends, playing games, whatever it is. So there is a lot of that downtime that you said, and I get it. People need to kind of kill time, especially when it's up when you're up high and maybe a little bit anxious about your clients and stuff like that. So yeah, it's an interesting place. It's interesting energy, but honestly, yeah, it's a really harsh environment, and I don't love spending a ton of time there. It's just it's really hard on the body.
Yeah, and that's the thing you mentioned. You're as a pro athlete, you're doing training. I mean, you can't just sit here and take
Yeah,
downtime waiting for your next attempt that was going to happen. And yet, at that elevation, it takes a lot longer for the body to recover, right?
exactly. Yep. Yeah, and one of the things that I we tried last year on Manaslu in the autumn was I actually brought a stationary bike to base camp on Manaslu and then brought it to Everest base camp as well. And I found that was really, really helpful tool because the other thing that's from a training perspective that's hard about Everest base camp is there's really nowhere uphill to go training wise that's kind of safe. You have the Everest route, which is like super objectively hazardous right at the beginning of the route. And then
Right.
you have a big mountain called Kumori that's right on the other side, which you can get maybe like 500 meters up that, but then it starts to get really sketchy. So it's really not a great place to train. And so yeah, the stationary bike was really helpful as just a way to be able to like go out and just pedal for an hour or two. And I had that in my tent, and I would just sit there and like literally like watch like series on my phone, and that like it is kind of
It's like
again
you're in
it's
the recreation room of the Holiday Inn, right?
exactly. Yeah, it's like yeah, it's just like I do usually leave the door open, so I have like the nice mountain views there as the backdrop. But it is like totally ridiculous. But it is a really helpful tool up at EDC especially. And but like that's such a niche problem for for me that it's probably not that interesting to everyone else.
Well, yeah, but I'm sure everybody's sitting there going, "How in the hell did you get a bike up there on the top of a yak?" I mean, or
Yep. Well, it was actually it was one of these passive stationary bikes that it doesn't require any electricity, so it's
right?
a completely mechanical system, and you can the way it's packaged, it comes in like a flat box. Like if you picture like a television, the
Yeah,
box of a TV would like a flat screen would come in. It looks like that, so it actually fits pretty well either on a chopper or like on the back of an animal, and it's pretty robust because it doesn't have any electrical parts. So it's actually easier than I expected to get that up there.
yeah, right. Okay. I mean, as kind of a side th thought, though, I mean, you've done a lot of projects on other mountains, whether it's in the Himalayas, but I mean, do you kind of miss the rusticness, the quiet of, quote, base camp of some of these other mountains versus this
Yeah,
nonsense at EBC?
for sure, it's definitely a very different vibe. I mean, I remember like the first time Scott Penfield and I went to Aconcagua, even there, that was the biggest base camp I'd ever been to. And even that, we were able to kind of just like pitch our own tent on the side of the hill and like no one bothered
Right.
us. And, we had like all we did was pay for permits. We didn't have any kind of support. And even there, you had the kind of more luxurious base camps, but seeing that, like that's really the only, like that's the bare minimum like Everest,
Right.
and like I get it. Like some people are staying there for a month or two. Well maybe not 2 months, but some people are staying there for certainly weeks, if not over a month, on the more traditional commercial expeditions. So a lot of that time for a standard climber is going to be sitting around a base camp. So you want to make them comfortable. Like
Right.
you don't want people to get sick. You don't want them to get totally mentally burnt out. All that stuff. Like I get it. When you go to Aconcagua, we stay at base camp for like 2 days. So it's like, okay, I get it. This
Yeah.
is going to be a little bit more rustic. Or you go to
Sure.
Ojos and you stay there for one night. So you get like all these other mountains. I think it is a very different experience, but it's super different when you're there for weeks on end versus one night or 2 nights or something like that.
Oh, for sure. Okay. Makes a lot of sense then.
Yeah,
So, just to, we've talked about extraneous stuff here, but for people who are not familiar with, maybe didn't listen to your podcast, your projects, I mean,
sure.
the podcast, training with Ty, with your dad, they're talking with your dad was fantastic. I mean, it
Oh,
really,
thanks. It's coming
what,
back. Don't worry.
yeah, no, I know. Yeah. It's, you just got through the first season, but,
Yeah,
I mean, gave a lot of great details about your training and everything you're going to, but, as an overview, your whole goal was to run up Everest in record time
yep,
without oxygen, supplemental
yep.
oxygen. Um, what was your driving force behind wanting to do this project in the first place?
I mean, I've kind of started moving into the really big mountain stuff over the course of the last like 2 to 5 years, I'd say. And Everest is the tallest mountain in the world. So
Right.
it's kind of like the natural progression of going from the smaller mountains here in Ecuador to the bigger mountains in the Andes, like Ojos and Aconcagua and Kilimanjaro, as well over in Tanzania, and then that all led to okay, the next obvious step is going to the Himalaya and doing climbing there and starting on the 6,000 meter peaks and 7,000 meter peaks and 8,000 meter peaks, the smaller 8,000ers in Nepal, and eventually okay, all of that, like that funnel is just leading up towards Everest, and it's kind of you know to me it is a pinnacle. It's the most well-known mountain on earth.
Right.
Like it's arguably probably not the most competitive speed record in the world, but it like not yet. Like I would like to make
Yeah.
it that way.
Yeah.
Like it has so much name recognition that for me that part is really exciting. Like everyone that you meet anywhere is going to know about Mount Everest, right? And when you say you're a professional mountain athlete, that's like the first thing anyone asks. Oh, are you in Mount Everest? Have you climbed Mount Everest?
Right.
And so that really, I think, kind of pushed me towards that. I am very motivated by competition, and I think the fact that those records are, I joke, but they're not like I don't think they are objectively the hardest records in the whole world, but they are really stout, and there's a reason they've stood around for the Southside Everest record is older than I am. It's from 1988 by
Wow.
Mark Petard, and like there's a reason for that because as I learned this spring, because like for your audience, like I went and I made 3 attempts on the mountain, and none of them were successful. I came back with my tail between my legs a little bit. Like it's a really, really hard and complicated project. And you don't
Right.
just have to be super fit, but you also need a bunch of elements of luck just from the mountain, from the weather, from your team, from your gear, all these things. It's just a very, very complex project. is really my big takeaway. So yeah, I mean, and I think that kind of stuff fascinates me. Like when you're, you have, okay, not only do you have to be super fit, but yeah, you kind of have to have the stars align a little bit and be able to problem solve out there. I think those kind of projects are really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, in listening to your podcasts, I mean, there were so many moving parts that you don't
Yeah,
have to
exactly.
deal with on lower elevation peaks.
For sure.
And I mean, first of all, I was kind of fascinated by the fact that you basically are able to run up to Camp Two or
Yeah,
where,
for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, most of the time I'm just thinking, oh yeah, you're just sitting there hanging on ropes with crampons and ice axes and whatever. But in reality, you were truly running up there up to a certain point.
Yep.
And what I thought was interesting though is how you probably could have used extra gear at a lot of these camps, but you have limitations on what you can bring up there. And
Right.
you ran into issues with your boots or and
Yep.
I mean just all sorts of contingencies that on most types of trips, hikes, you can plan on a lot of things, but here you can plan, but you can't necessarily do, realistically speaking.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I've always tried to go super light in the mountains. I
Yeah.
kind of approach it from like a trail running or even just a, track and field background. And that's, I think, part of the ethos of track and field is it's a sport of minimalism. And then you
Yep.
get to the big mountains and it's like, the higher you go, the more stuff you need. And I think I still definitely push the limit on that. I mean, last year I climbed Manaslu, which is, 8,000, almost 8,200 meters. It's the seventh highest mountain in the world, I think. And, I basically climbed it in running shoes, and people are up there in pretty much spacesuits and space boots. And, so I do think that there's part of it where it's like, okay, you can definitely like whittle down what kind of the average Joe is maybe using to climb the mountain. But at the same time, like you said, it is still no joke. It's a big mountain. It gets really cold. The wind is a big problem. You're hiking, climbing, running, doing all these different activities. Sometimes on very, very steep exposed terrain. So, you do need a certain amount of equipment. Like you can't go up Everest in running shoes. You can to a certain point, but you can't go to the summit. It's just too cold. And I think that was, one of the things I learned from this past season was looking at, okay, like you said, there's just so many moving parts, and what are the parts that we can take away? I think trying to strip it away to the simplest possible setup is really the goal for next time is okay, how can we remove complexity? Because when you have more complexity, you have more potential points of failure. And
Sure.
that was what I found. And it's not just that you have one potential point of failure, but then that point of failure affects everything. So for example, the boot incident that you mentioned, which happened on my first attempt, I had a problem with the zipper on my boot. It wouldn't close. Long story short, whatever. We kind of finagled a MacGyver solution with a plastic bag, literally just like one of these hyper light, like Teflon kind of plastic, like hard, not hard plastic, but you know what I mean. It's like the super tough plastic that people use for stuff sacks and stuff. And we had that over the boot, and it kind of closed up. But we spent an hour doing that, and then that hour, it impacts all these other things. So not only like the boot is the initial problem, but then you have an hour, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, I wasn't eating during that hour because
Yeah.
I'm not moving. So now I'm an hour behind on nutrition. And like my body gets really cold because I'm sitting in a tent at 22,000 feet doing all this, like basically outside in the middle of the night. So now my body temperature is too low, my metabolism is slowed down. There's all these cascading problems that happen from that one thing. So it's not just that you have a bunch of points of failure, it's that you have cascading points of failure where they affect everything else and then they cause other
Mm,
problems down
yeah, yeah.
down the line. And that's, yeah, it's just, it's like it is kind of like going to space or something, in the fact that you just have so many little pieces and everything is connected to each other, and if one thing goes wrong it can really mess up everything else. So yeah, that's really my big takeaway. And again, that's going back to the beginning of the question. It's like, that's why for me it's all about, okay, how can we make this as simple as possible? Like even if it means slowing down a little bit, like carrying more stuff, if it means I can be more independent and require fewer gear changes or fewer other people involved in the mountain, that's a huge win because it's just removing points of complexity.
Yeah. When I was listening to your final episode of this season's podcast, I was thinking exactly like it's like going to space. You
Yeah,
you got to have everything there, but not too much. And
Right.
you're not
Exactly.
running out to the local Home Depot to pick up some extra gear you might need. So,
Right.
yeah, but I'm sure space flights have certain redundancies, but at some point you just can't have that
100%.
much weight
Yeah.
going up there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that is literally an analogy I've made before is the the famous tyranny of the rocket or the rocket fuel paradox, which I learned about back in college as an engineer, which is basically this idea that to get a rocket to space, you need a bunch of power. And to get that power, you need fuel, but the fuel has weight. So the more fuel
Right.
you have, the heavier the rocket gets, which means you need more fuel, which means the rocket gets heavier, which means you need more fuel, which means the rocket gets heavier, right? So it's
Yeah.
like this infinite thing until we figured out jet fuel and rocket fuel, and then it all works. But it is the same idea of, as you're going up the mountain, it's like, okay, you can carry all this stuff, but then all of a sudden that means you have to go slower, which means you're going slower. Okay, now you need more food, you need more water, maybe you need fuel on the stove. Like all these things are going to slow you down, and now you need
Right.
even more, right? It's like exactly the same idea.
Yeah. So, but yeah, and then just certain things that happen at high altitude. I mean, as you said, you got to get up and down. We've heard about the death zone, and there's only so much
Yeah.
time you can spend there. But even just in general, your fueling takes on a whole different element when you're up at that elevation. And, you had your issues with that, is not surprisingly. Um, just everything is accentuated. Even things just like the wind, which, was
Yeah.
the bugaboo on the second attempt that you made, even with oxygen. And it was interesting to me to hear that like people would not recommend that you needed oxygen or that the wind causes you to have to use oxygen instead, just because of how much it takes out of your body at that elevation.
Right. It's yeah, and that was something I honestly hadn't really considered is just how much tighter the safety margin is when you're climbing without supplemental oxygen
Yeah.
because yeah, hypoxia really just messes with your circulation. It messes with your ability to regulate your body temperature. So when you look at injuries like frostbite and other cold related injuries on the mountains, it's like orders of magnitude higher for if you're climbing without oxygen on really big mountains just because of that and that made everything just so much more complicated for us this season because like you said the wind was really a pretty persistent factor almost all season literally until
Yeah.
like the last day that very last attempt on May 27th that was pretty much the best day of the season and it was really the only day of the season where the jet stream had truly lifted off the mountain and the air was basically still it was basically a
Mhm.
perfect day for climbing the mountain. And, at that point, I was honestly just totally fried from, that was my third time going to, up to 8,500 meters in 16 days at that point. And my body was just like, nope, can't do it. Like it just wasn't going to happen that day. So, it is what it is. But at the end of the day, I think that like that factor of climbing without oxygen versus with oxygen. You look at like I've had people ask me like, well, why didn't you do it? There were like hundreds of people that summited it. I'm like,
Right.
well, it's a completely different game when you're climbing without oxygen. It's just a completely different game. And even climbing without oxygen from base camp in a single push is taking that even to the extreme versus when you have camps where you're staying and those sections are much shorter and all that. So yeah, it's just you know yeah, the oxygen part is, that's the crux of the mountain. It's not a
Yeah.
complex mountain technically. It's just really, really high, and there's not a lot of oxygen up there. And so, yeah, being able to, if you're climbing with supplemental oxygen, you're lowering that that effective altitude by, 1,000 to 2,000 meters. That's up almost 7,000 feet. Suddenly, it's not that much bigger than Aconcagua or Ojos or one of these mountains where
Yeah.
you can go up there in running shorts and t-shirt basically. On a good day, at least.
Yeah, well, it's maybe a little chillier on Everest to do that, but I don't know.
Yeah,
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 yeah, and then you're dealing with the interesting element of just everybody's familiar now about just this massive highway of people going up there, and
yeah.
I respect the fact you were saying like, hey, I'm not going to say, hey, I'm Tyler Andrews and I'm going for a record here, get out of my way, kind of thing. I mean,
No,
you gotta everybody's up there's got their own story why they're going up,
yeah, exactly. And I've always tried to be very open about the fact that like I don't have any more right to be on the mountain than anyone else. I paid for the same permit they did.
right?
We're all up there doing our best, and I think that's really important. Like yeah, so many people asking me for this project, like, do you get to like have the mountain to yourself? Do they close it down for you? I'm like, no, absolutely not.
Right.
It's the opposite. I have to work around all these people. and for what it's worth, people I would say without exception, every single person who I met on the mountain was extremely generous in terms of like, yeah, if I was coming up behind, hey, can I just scooch around you, clip around like on the rope or
Yeah.
whatever. And I also try to be very cognizant of the fact that, some of these people may not be quite as comfortable on the terrain as me. So I'm trying not to like push people or freak them out or anything, and just like, all right, we're going to do this, quickly and safely, and I'm going to go around you, and that's fine. But yeah, you're right. Like everybody has the same right to be on the mountain, and that is one of the big questions I get and got all the time leading up to this project. Is like, people see these viral photos of these huge lines of people in their spacesuits going to, usually it's up on the top of the mountain, from the south summit to the summit, where you'll have 300 people standing in a line, and those are real, and that does happen, but it usually happens for like 1 or 2 days per season.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of groupthink in the big commercial expeditions. They all want to go between like May 18th and May 22nd, because it's the warmest part of the season. I honestly don't know why they don't spread out more. Usually there are more reasonable days, especially like this year, those days weren't even that good. It's not like they were perfect days then. It's just like that's how they kind of schedule it. And then everybody just ends up on those same handful of days. And maybe there's kind of a safety in numbers thing, I guess, but I think it's more likely to cause problems than help, just because if you're standing in line waiting to go down at the Hillary step for 3 hours, which I met some people who had to do that at 28,800 feet or whatever it is. Like that's a pretty dangerous situation. If you have a
Right.
problem, if you're climbing with oxygen and you run out of oxygen at 8,700 meters or 28,800 feet, that's a tremendous problem. And you're probably not coming off the mountain. You're probably up there forever.
Yeah.
That's how a lot of people die, is they have problems with their oxygen. They're climbing on oxygen, and suddenly they like we said before, the oxygen reduces the altitude by 2,000 meters. Now all of a sudden you get teleported up 2,000 meters. That feels unbelievably bad. And if you've already been climbing for 12 or 14 or 18 hours, like some of these people have, then your body's just completely out of gas at that point. So
Yeah. Can
that I think
imagine.
is a really serious problem. But anyways, yeah, like going back to your question, for me, it is a big piece of the puzzle. Is there, you just know that all those big groups are going to be going in the middle of the season, and so you really do have to bookend it. You have to go basically right at the beginning of the season before anyone goes up, or you have to go at the very end of the season after all those people have summited and gone home.
Yeah. No, that's true. And yeah, I don't know what I guess maybe people have flights booked and they have to go up at a certain time frame. I don't know.
Yeah,
But you, speaking of people, I mean, you had quite the support up there, whether
for sure.
there were people who are leading your expedition, or obviously, you have Chris up there, and and even remote people, people like Chris Tomer, your meteorology
Yep.
team there. So it really was a huge group effort going on there.
No, 100%. I've always said it's any project of this scale, it takes a village. People see me, but there's so many people involved that I would not be up there without them. Like you said, Chris Fisher, he's been my climbing partner for the last few years. He was a huge help, both at base camp and up on the mountain itself when I was doing the FKTs, or FKT attempts, I should say. And then yeah, Dallas Steven, he was our base camp coordinator. So he was the guy who was on the radio with me, from base camp the whole time, and helping on the logistics side in terms of looking at, okay, this is when the other teams are going here. This looks like a good day, but it's not going to be too crowded, all that. And yeah, like the forecasting is unbelievably important nowadays. It's gotten really, really good.
Yeah,
That's part of why it's so much safer now. You look at, like 1996, for example, the Into Thin Air year, John Krakauer's famous book that then became
yeah,
a movie. You know, almost everything that went wrong that day could have been prevented just if that took place today in 2025. Because we have better forecasting, we have GPS, so you can navigate if you get caught in a storm.
yeah,
We have more fixed lines on the mountain, so it's easier to follow the route. There's, all, and it was a huge tragedy, but also it's important to recognize how far the mountain has come in terms of that safety infrastructure. And that's why we see, hundreds of people every year that are able to summit,
right.
who are not professional athletes. They're not elite mountaineers. They're kind of the weekend warriors. And, there's pros and cons to that. But it's for what for better or for worse. Like they have made the mountain very, very accessible, and I would say as safe as you can make an 8,000-meter mountain.
Right. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, describe that route for people who maybe can't comprehend this. I mean, obviously, somebody goes out there and lays these ropes out there, and
Yeah,
then there are these ladders you see that are lashed together out there to cross certain
yeah,
crevasses and everything. I mean, th those things aren't there forever. Somebody has
no.
to go out and they're physically put in the work to do that, which is pretty insane, really.
Yeah, so Everest is a unique mountain in the sense that almost every step of the route, I would say from like 15 minutes outside of base camp to the summit, there's a rope that you can clip into. So if anyone's ever done like a via ferrata, like one of these, where they have like cables into a cliff and you're kind of clipping into it, it's called fixed rope. So the rope stays there. You're not roped to anybody else. You are connected to the ground because the rope is connected to the ground. And this is, I don't know. I want to say it's like 10 miles or something worth of route from basically the bottom to the top of the mountain.
Wow.
And yeah, that happens every year. Every year they put that in and they take it out. And that is a tremendous part of the work that goes into preparing the mountain every year is this team of Sherpa climbers goes out and sets the route for everybody else in usually they start in like early April and it takes them most of the month of April. And then,
Wow.
those guys are the first guys to get to the summit, usually, in early May. So it's probably a 5 week project. Because you got to think about it. They got to not only go through and fix the rope as they're going and put it in safely and anchor it, but they've got to carry all the rope up there. They got to carry miles and miles of rope, and they do not let them helicopter that stuff up. They carry all that stuff by hand. Everything above base camp that's non-emergency is done by hand. The only helis that fly above base camp are evacs. So that yeah, it's a wild thing. And to go back to your question about the route, the route starts with the Kungu Icefall, which is maybe the most famous feature of
Yeah.
Everest, other than the summit ridge. And it's a really scary place. It is effectively the edge of the glacier, the bottom edge of the Kungu Glacier, where it comes over a steep section of cliffs and it's breaking apart and it's moving. So you can watch a time lapse of this and you can see it moving down like a waterfall. But it's made up of chunks of ice, some of which are the size of multi-story buildings. But it's still moving. It's moving, sometimes a meter a day is the number that you hear.
Wow.
So multiple feet per day. And so what that means is that they set a route through that ice fall, and you are literally walking through and under these giant, angled, towering seracs of ice that are going to fall at some point. And it's just like, well, I just hope it doesn't fall in the next 6 seconds while I'm walking under it.
Yeah.
And but you have collapses, and you have, they literally call them the icefall doctors, are the guys who go in and specifically set the route in the icefall, and they will maintain it every single day of the season, pretty much, because literally between the morning and the evening, the route will change and like a crevasse will open up or something will topple over, and all of a sudden the route is impassable. And that happens almost every single day of the season. So it's really
Really.
wild how
Wow.
dynamic that part of the mountain is. And yeah, like you said as well, that's where you will see a lot of the ladders. Mostly it's over crevasses. They stretch them
Yeah.
out basically as bridges. And I think the longest one this year was like three kind of standard, I don't know what those are, 10-foot ladders. Three of those were just tied together with string, like
Right.
across this huge crevasse. And so I'm like, yeah, this is on the last attempt. Again, this is how it changes. It wasn't there before. And on the last attempt on the 27th, it was. And it's like, it's in the nighttime, so it's dark, and you just got your headlamp, and you are like, especially with a ladder bridge that long, I'll go on all fours on the ladder. And so you're looking down into the crevasse and your headlamp is just shining down. It just disappears. So you just can't see anything. It's just like this bottomless pit of doom. It's so scary, man. It's like so not cool. Like, it's honestly like one of the craziest places I've ever been in my life. But like, if it weren't so scary, it would be really cool and beautiful. But it's just really, yeah, it's really scary.
Man, I mean, I don't really fear heights very much, but I think just I'm not sure if I would trust this ladder thing. I mean, it's like that is just the
Yeah.
sketchiest thing I can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and there's some where I mean, they're like, bolted into the ice on both ends. So like they do wobble because they're aluminum ladders, but like they're
Yeah,
relatively stable. I would say the sketchier ones are where you don't have a ladder and you just have like a 5 foot opening, and it's like I'm pretty sure I could jump across that. But
right.
like you have to jump. Like you can't, like, I don't know, I'm not that tall. Like I can't step across that. You actually have to jump. And like, again, you're clipped into the rope there. But still, it's like if you fell, it would be really shitty and scary. So like it's not
Yeah,
the
I
best.
would,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, plus you're wearing all this gear and everything. You don't quite have the same horizontal
Exactly.
leaping ability, and
Yeah, not that I have a ton of like horizontal or vertical leap in general as an
no,
endurance athlete, but
you're
I was
what do you
never a
call it?
long jumper.
No, I was going to say you were a short fiber white guy.
That's about right. Yep.
Yep, yep. Damn.
Yep.
So, um, the people that you had out there, you mentioned, I'm sorry, Stephen, what's his name?
That was Steven.
Dow Stephen, right?
Yep.
I mean, this guy sounds like, like the guru sitting on top of the mountain out there kind of thing. I mean, this guy seems to just, he knows all. And I mean, he's the guy who at times kind of made the, thumbs up or thumbs down for you in
Exactly.
terms of going
Yep.
up. Yeah.
Yep. And that's I think a really important thing is to have as much as you can to take the decision making out of the moment. It's something that I've talked about a lot with Dawa, with my parents and other people of just that idea that you don't want to be making a decision at 8,500 meters
Mm,
when you're exhausted and emotional and the summit's right there, but like you're hallucinating and it's just you don't want to be making a decision there. You want to either have someone else making the decision for you, or you want to have a list of like objective criteria where you can say, and this is what I did, and when I had to turn myself around, is okay, I have objective criteria, and I can say, I am going too slowly, or I'm hallucinating, and I don't trust myself to be able to handle, the safety of managing ropes and knots and clipping and all this stuff. And so I don't trust myself to go to the mountain or to go to the top of the mountain and come back down safely. And Ed Viesturs, who's one of the most famous American mountaineers, has a famous saying of getting to the top is optional, getting down is mandatory.
right.
And I think that's really important. Like for me, this is it's sport at the end of the day, and I care a lot about it. It's my life, it's my livelihood. But I also don't want to die and become a landmark up there. So
And that's
it's
literally the case. I'm sure you saw a few of
yeah,
those. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And yeah, for people who don't know, that is it's literally a thing that if you die in the upper part of the mountain, they generally will not take your body down
Right.
because it's just too cumbersome. It's too hard. They can't fly helicopters up there. Bodies are really heavy as much as it's morbid, and it's really hard to do anything up there. So yeah,
Right.
there's still bodies up there from the 90s and even earlier
Right.
that have been up there for 20, 30 years. Yeah.
Yeah. No, Len Forkas, who I had on this podcast, who did make the summit
Nice.
sometime while you were up there, he mentioned later on that he literally like had to stand on a guy's backpack
Oh,
of somebody whose
that's
body was frozen in there, and he said, yeah, literally, he had to step over this guy and use his backpack as leverage to get up to the next step.
that's dark. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very dark. Yeah,
Yeah.
not you don't want to be one of
I
those landmarks. Yeah,
No, you definitely don't want to be a landmark. Yep.
no. Man, oh man. So, um, you mentioned taking the decision making out and everything. I mean, at times, I'm sure you had a lot of dark moments in your head about like, am I doing the right thing here? And or just self-doubt or whatever it was. I mean,
Mhm.
how did you overcome a lot of those types of things? Or were you just like so dialed in that it's like, I'm just doing this until somebody tells me to turn it off?
The thing that's interesting about climbing really big mountains versus say like running a marathon or even a 100-mile race is that we as runners like you and I train ourselves to ignore all the warning signs,
Oh yeah,
right? And
right,
just keep going no matter what. Like that's what I've been training to do for 20 years as an athlete at this point.
right,
And that is a really great thing in general in endurance sport where there's no objective danger. The problem is when you start combining life and death decision making and then you have that like endurance athlete brain, it actually they like conflict with each other because I'm up there over 8,000 meters. It's the last possible attempt on the last possible day. And it's like, okay, part of my brain is like, just keep going, just keep going. Like you feel tired, you feel like you're throwing up, whatever. Like it's fine, just keep going, just keep going. That's my like runner brain saying that. But then at the same time, there's like the mountaineer brain, which is saying, hey, wait a minute. If this is what's happening right now, then we need to reevaluate the situation because, in a marathon or even in an ultra, like the worst thing that happens is like you drop out and like get picked up by your mom or like you slow
Yeah.
down and walk it in and like with your tail between your legs. But if you run out of gas at 28,000 feet, you're gonna die. That's you're
Right.
gonna be up there forever. And the problem with that makes it even more complicated is you're doing this calculus of, okay, not only do I have to project out the energy that I need to get to the summit, but I need to get back down. And that's going to take a
Sure.
long time and a lot of
Right.
effort, right? So there is this weird back and forth in my mind where I'm like, oh my God, am I just like being a huge baby and like I should just keep going? Or like, is this really a dangerous situation? And that's not something my brain is used to dealing with. And that
Mm.
was, one of the first time. Well, I guess I've done it a handful of times in the mountains, but it's something that as a runner, we're just so far on the other end of that spectrum of just push, push, push. It doesn't matter. And once you're up on the mountains, it really does kind of reverse. And so that was kind of the hardest thing for me when I was up there that last time, especially was I had to turn myself around. Like I said before, I didn't have communications with base camp at that point, so I had to make that call in that moment of, okay, is this a situation where I'm just tired and if I keep going, maybe I'll rally? It's like, no, I don't think so. Like, this is really terminal. This feels really bad. I just don't trust myself and my brain and my body.
Mm.
And, it was a pretty devastating call to have to make, honestly, because it's like, this has been 2 years in the making, this project. And I knew, like, I'm probably going to have to come back here again a year later.
Right.
But, it was the right call. It was 100% the right call because I could just tell extrapolating out that it was going to take too long and I wasn't with it enough mentally to get myself up and down the mountain safely.
Yeah. And if, in your case, you felt it was more mental than physical at that point.
Well, yes and no. It was mental in the sense that like I think my brain was one of the things that was betraying me. But it was physical in the sense that I was exhausted, and that
Yeah.
was it's all tied together, like mind is body at that point. It wasn't like I I was like mentally, you know, I didn't want to do it anymore. It was that literally my brain was seeing stuff that wasn't there.
Mm.
And,
That's a
that's
problem.
for me, that was a big red line of just, okay, like if I try to clip into a rope that's not actually there and then put weight on it and lean backwards and fall 3,000 meters into Tibet, that's going to be a huge bummer. So
Yeah.
I just, yeah, that like once I started not being able to trust my mind to
Right.
be able to tell me what was going on, then that was kind of the red line for me. Yeah.
Yeah. And then when you saw Steve telling you to turn around.
Giant human-sized Steve. Yeah. Turn back. You
Yeah.
shall not pass. Exactly.
Yeah. So how high had you gotten at that point?
So I flipped, I think it was 8450. I was just above the balcony,
Okay.
which is about halfway. It's just under 28,000 feet. So, I had, I don't know, 1,200 feet to go, like 300 meters to go, 400 meters to go, which like sounds like it's not that much and it's not, but it's also like at that altitude with no oxygen, it's like kind of a lot, but it is close enough where it's like, oh man, you can see it. It's right there. It's not
Yeah.
that far, but
Shoot.
you're also going so slow that you're like, oh man, this is going to take 3 hours,
Right.
just to
Yeah. I was
go
going to
up.
ask you how fast you think you were moving at that point.
I was going when I turned around. I think I was going like under 100 meters an hour. Like that's really slow. It was like
Wow.
like slower than I had predicted because I was just like exhausted. Yeah. So yeah, I mean that was going to take me 3 or 4 more hours to go up, and then maybe another 2 hours to come down. So you're talking about 6 hours just to get back to the balcony. And I think I turned around at like 4 or 5 p.m. So like I was going to be on the
In the
summit in the
dark.
dark,
Yeah. Yeah.
coming
Yeah.
down in the dark. Yeah. So it was a non-starter. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, sounds like you made the right decision. I know you've said
Yeah.
this. I know others have said, sometimes the mountain talks to you too, and
Yeah.
you have to listen.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. How hard is it coming down versus going up?
Uh, it really depends. I mean, like On a day like that, it was really hard because I just felt like I'd really gotten the tank to zero. And like mentally,
Yeah.
I was just super bummed because, I was like, okay, well, this is really the end of the season this time. Like, there's really no more chance. And so, yeah, there was part of it that was just mentally just super being really sad and bummed and, disappointed with how things had ended up. But also, I was had literally like almost run myself to death. And you still have 10,000 feet of descent or something to get back to base
Yeah,
camp
yeah, I know
on like pretty steep terrain sometimes. So like, yeah, it's not trivial. It's not. There's some mountains where it's easier to get down, where it's really easy snow, or it's free, or you can rappel a lot of it. But here, it's honestly just a lot of walking, and it just gets really old.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, and I mean, I've certainly been in that DNF mode, if you would, where you're walking down
Yeah,
past people feeling crap,
exactly.
but here you're by yourself and you got to descend for the next 10 hours or whatever. That got to be
Yeah.
such a shitty time because you're inside your head the whole time coming down.
Yeah, exactly. You're inside your head, and that was basically the second all-nighter in a row because like I'd left, late afternoon or no, early evening, like 8 p.m. I think I left. So I was like climbing all night, climbing all day, and then descending all night to get back to base camp the next morning. So I've been up for 2 full nights at that point. It was probably the most tired I've ever been in my entire life. Was when I got to like I was still hallucinating when I got back to Kathmandu like that the next night, like 48 hours later, because I
Oh,
hadn't
wow.
had a real night's sleep yet. I was still seeing like weird writing on stuff. It was really, really, really disconcerting. And it wasn't until I laid down in a bed in a hotel at sea level that I finally like got a good night's sleep. And then I woke up and everything was normal again. I was like, okay, thank you. The world is back to normal.
Yeah, it's like you just came off an acid trip here. Yeah.
Seriously, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it was
Oh,
wild.
crap. Well, shoot, that's amazing. Yeah, I know you're kind of up against it time-wise here. I mean, I know we
Yeah,
could talk
yeah.
for quite a bit longer
I
here,
know, I
but
know. We'll catch up in Colorado too, though. So I'm gonna be
absolutely.
there next week. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but no, I appreciate your time here and sharing these stories. I encourage everybody to go back and listen to the Talking with Ty,
Thank you.
or talking with your dad, the whole podcast. Like I say, it's just fascinating, the whole thing, and hearing all the steps you went through and the logistics. It's a great education of most of us are never going to undertake a project quite like that. So it was very, very cool.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing all that.
Thank you. Yeah, and honestly, it was really fun to do. Like, it was a good opportunity for me to just like get to talk to my dad every week, and that was really fun.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's honestly you could go back and kind of like binge listen through the whole season in like a few days. I think we had like 20 episodes in the end. We basically did one a week, and all the way from the very beginning of the season until the last attempt. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. And we will be starting up season two, which will be my prep for UTMB, which will be starting shortly here. So that'll probably first episode will probably be. I think we'll record it this weekend, so it'll be out a week from then,
All right. Yeah.
like
You're going to be running
end
normal.
of June, early July.
Yeah.
Sorry,
You're going to be running normal people's races. So,
I know, just 100 mile around the Alps, whatever.
yeah. Yeah. Well, that'll be, you haven't done that before, have you?
I have not. I've been there the last
Yeah.
like 3 or 4 years,
Right.
mostly to crew gym, and that was a blast. And yeah, it's my turn, so I'm excited.
That's cool. Is Jim crewing you or is he running it?
I his last time I talked to him, he was still planning to run. He was entered in states, and then he's had a knee thing that kept him out of
Oh,
Western states. But I think he's still planning to run UTMB, as far as I know.
all right. Jim Walmsley for people who are wondering. So,
Yep.
cool, cool. Well, Ty, thank you so much. Once we get
Thank
off
you,
here, let's
man.
figure out how we're going to meet up in Colorado.
Absolutely. All right.
All right. Well, great talking to you again.
Thank you. You too.